So this is a panel of IMS board members, and what I like to say about the IMS board members is that the main qualification for being an IMS board member is that you can think beyond your own organization, because all of the contributing members of IMS are obviously representing their own organization. We've got almost 200 contributing members, but we've only got 20 board members. And so the board members know that a very important part of their duties is to think more broadly than just their own particular situation. And I think, as we can all appreciate, that's not an easy thing to do in today's world of business demands and so forth. So we're really appreciative of their work. And because this panel is called Pushing the Envelope, where do we want to be a year from now? I can tell my pushing the envelope joke. I've told it before. Has anyone heard it? No matter how far we push the envelope, it'll still be stationary.
Oh.
Ooh.
Wow.
Oh.
Okay. Well, so where do we want to be a year from now? Mark Leuba, IMS's own Vice President for Product Management, will facilitate a discussion with several IMS board members to share their perspectives of the work that lies ahead for IMS to continue making progress towards enabling an open ecosystem. Please welcome Mark Leuba and the panel.
Thank you, Rob. I don't know about you all, but I've felt a real excitement in this year's conference. And it's really palpable. We've got record registration. LTI Advantage is on fire. It represents unparalleled collaboration around a common cause. Yesterday in one of the panels, a product supplier from APHIS said it well. It quoted Victor Hugo: "There's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come." And when I've been reflecting on this week's sessions and the entire program, I'm left with a feeling that we're really hitting critical mass as an organization. We are shifting from panel presentations and sessions where we're learning how to do things to presentations where we're sharing with each other what we've done and how that can be improved. So I think we're starting to see a really powerful network effect, and we have every expectation that with our members' continued engagement and contributions, that will continue. So thank you very much. This panel is really a time for reflection and opportunity to smell the roses, I'd like to think, but also to discuss potential course corrections and adjustments that are needed. We're really fortunate, as Rob said this morning, to have our panel of experts, IMS board members, leaders in education and in technology, discuss these important subjects for IMS and its members. So for the next hour, we'll consider our progress and talk about goals for the upcoming year and hopefully beyond. And I wanted to correct something that Rob said at the beginning at his keynote, and I've had a total second thought about standards, is that standards are sexy. Don't we agree? That won't be the first question, Rick.
Good.
The first question is definitely not a softball. Education technology has made really remarkable progress in terms of the nature and capabilities of the platforms and the tools in the 20 years of IMS's existence. I think we can all agree to that. And yet, from a societal point of view, the education community continues to struggle with concerns about uncertain student outcomes and questions of value for the traditional education model. The question, Rick, is, are we succeeding in our efforts for the education community? Should we be doing more, less, or something different altogether?
So I get the softball, huh? So when I think about value and I think about what we're doing in the education community, I think about expectations. And expectations are constantly changing. I think back before I started VitalSource in the mid-90s, I spent a dozen years at Apple Computer. And as all of us know, computers change every year. You always buy new ones, if not every year, every few years. The computers do the same thing as they did when you bought them, but your expectations have changed. You want to do more. because developers have created things that do new things on that platform, push the platform, change the platform. This is happening in EdTech too, in my mind. People, expectations are changing, so their judgments of the value are changing as well. And the bar we're hitting and the bar we need to hit is constantly moving, but that's a good thing. It means that we're raising the platform, the horizon we're seeing is further away, and the things that were a long ways off a while ago are getting closer. And we're able to build on the successes and learn from the failures in the past. And so when I think about whether we should be doing more, absolutely. When I think about whether we're hitting a value proposition for you all, for the institutions and for the learners of the world, we need to constantly be pushed as vendors to make sure that we're hitting the latest and the newest and the most focused expectations. So while I agree with the question, I would challenge it a little bit too. So, and I'd love to hear from my cohorts what they think. So.
Any other thoughts about?
Yeah, I think in K-12, the technology hasn't necessarily changed the motion of the classroom and the instructional process. So while the technology has changed the implementation of what you're trying to do, you're still trying to solve traditional processes, test scores, those type of things, which don't tend to show the difference in outcomes. And there's lots of districts that have test score improvement that have gone digital. So I think that's a misnomer that it hasn't. So in K-12, it's extremely important that you look at, we're starting to change the fundamental classroom, the fundamental operation, the fundamental of the front end and the back end, the need of the students, the engagement of the parents. Those are going to take time. But the learning and the testing is still the same. And so if someone said to me, do you think kids are smarter than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Absolutely. The information available to them, how they can get to them, their understanding, how fast they can learn something is dynamically different. But that doesn't necessarily apply when you test everybody the same way you did before. So you have districts that take technology, fundamentally design it to solve the problem that the end goal is to have a better test score, when that's really not the only outcome you want from the technology itself.
Jeremy?
Yeah, so I think we skipped over intros, so for those that
You're absolutely right.
I can
Please
do
accept
mine.
my apology. Jeremy Auger, Chief Strategy Officer, D2L. Tim Beekman, President and Co-founder, Safari Montage. Rick Johnson, Vice President, Product Strategy, VitalSource Technologies. Melissa Loble, Vice President, Platform and Professional Services, Instructure. And Holly Sagues, Executive Director, Governmental Affairs and Strategic Solutions for the Florida Virtual School. Thank you.
Great. So now that is out of the way, so coming from the LMS space, I guess when I think back to close to 20 years ago, and I think about the problems we were trying to solve back then, that's a very different story than the problems we're trying to solve today. So I mean, when we got started in 1999, we started by looking at the distance ed situation, right? So I took distance ed courses when I was in university, and literally it was, you were by yourself. In my case, I was way up in Ottawa in a basement apartment taking a distance ed course. I had a textbook, I had a stack of assignments. I'd do my assignments, I'd put them in a manila envelope, piece of stationery. I'd put a stamp on it and I would mail it to my professor, and I would get a red line and a grade back, maybe 2-3 weeks later. That was the feedback cycle. And then eventually at the end of a course, I would go and I would sit on a campus somewhere and take a proctored exam. And that was the first time I realized I actually had classmates. That was the experience in 1999, 1998. So we were bringing technology to bear on that problem, which was to just get over the hurdle of distance and time and asynchronous interaction, bringing peer-to-peer communication and tightening feedback loops. You go to Google Images right now and you search for distance ed, you don't see manila envelopes come back in the pictures, right? It's mice and computers, and it's changed the culture. So when we fast forward today and we look at the problems we're solving, we're talking about leveraging digital learning data to build predictive analytics indexes and identify risk factors and preemptive intervention strategies, that is a world away from the problems of 1999. So, so I think to Rick's earlier point, the ice has definitely shifted over time in terms of what problems we're solving and how we're having impact. All that being said, I think what we are starting to see and will see more of is an increased focus on efficacy. So, a lot of people look to technology as kind of a silver bullet, and in some cases, maybe it is. It's a piece of the puzzle, but I think there will be an increasing focus on real data to support real outcomes and the efficacy of technology for the problem it's trying to solve. I think with that comes a need for more clarity in terms of which problems you actually are trying to solve so that you can see if it has an impact. So I think we'll continue to see that increase. We're seeing it in all segments, early stages, but I think it'll be a bigger force to be reckoned with, especially from the vendor community over time.
So speaking about efficacy and emphasis, what other prevailing trends are driving education and ed tech innovation, either directly or indirectly? Are these meaningfully different from prior years? And what are the implications for IMS Global? Melissa?
Sure. So I think we're starting to see the true unbundling of the learning experience. We've been playing with CBE models, we've been playing with outcomes-directed models, but now we're truly seeing that not only are we breaking up what a learning experience looks like, we're not even commonly defining in districts and in institutions what that unit is. So to one institution or to one district, it might mean a collection of outcomes aligned to a particular skill. In another, it might be that just single skill. And because of that unbundling of the learning experience, we're starting to see challenges come from that in how do we represent that in a true ecosystem or a true technology fashion. So I think that's a trend that's actually here. Like I said, we've played around with it for the last 10 years. Specialty institutions have addressed this, but now it's becoming much more mainstream, and it's challenging this idea of how do we make sure that we're representing as technology vendors, as institutions, as teaching and learning specialists, how do we truly represent what that unbundling looks like? And I think that leads to, there's no longer a centralized starting or ending point to a learning experience. I think and maybe this leads into conversations that I've had with folks about what's the future of LMS over the last couple days. We're not asking students to start anymore just in a course shell with a list of to-do actions, right? A student might be starting by taking a picture in a lab, or a student might be starting with a video, or a student might be starting with inputting content or experiences or reflections into a journal. And then they're leading into perhaps an assessment of that, or a discussion or a dialogue around that. And then they might be leading into an action activity to prove that skill or to test that skill or to deepen that skill. So because of that and that unbundling of the learning experience, we're also seeing a more networked approach to how technologies are used in institutions on campuses. And I think that's where we have to be prepared for that trend. We have to be prepared for being able to connect in new and innovative ways to a non-common unit of learning.
Tim, Holly,
So
K-12 trends?
yeah, so I'm going to try to summarize a lot of what I'm hearing here, in that, for students, the goal has always been we want every student to be able to achieve their absolute highest potential, right? That's been the whole goal of education from the beginning. But now with technology, how we can meet every student where they are with what they need, and that custom solution is just exploding with different types of opportunities, which is going to make it really interesting when we get down to the efficacy studies, because what are we going to measure? And there is no single measurement anymore, I don't think. It's not a single test. It's, you know, is it a collection of micro-credentials, which we've talked a lot about over the last couple of days? Is it more, you know, graduation rates based on 40 different paths to graduation? What is that going to be to really be able to show that technology has made that huge difference? So really excited about it. From a policy perspective, which is where I live most of my world these days, that's what folks are looking for. They're looking for ways for students to reach their maximum potential, but yet they're still kind of stuck on a single measurement right now.
Any more to add?
You know, from a technical perspective, just a little different perspective on it. I think if you compared technology-wise where we were 5 years ago, kind of what Rick said, in K-12 in a classroom with a, you know, 1 or 2 devices and very costly devices for students, and where we are with now with what Microsoft's announced with their units, and Dell and HP and Google with their things, those items have also influenced that change. And fundamentally, I think the network people that are managing in K-12 districts today compared to 5 years ago are much more efficient. So when you go to a school district like in Orange County, you know, they can't have downtime, right? They can't have, this isn't an ancillary piece of their instructional process now. In the last 3 or 4 years, it is the instructional process. And so I think because of that, that adds to everything everybody else has said here, is we have an enterprise delivery that works, and that makes teachers more engaged, makes the technology work, and it starts to become more of the bigger player in the outcomes and the direction.
You know, when I think about technology trends and I think about the IMS community, I'm struck by an observation that was made earlier this week. We've had a very interesting 3 days here. Any of you who've been involved in the community for a long time will remember Chuck Severance, Dr. Chuck, describing the early days of LTI as sort of solving what he called the duh factor. It was the obvious thing that needed to be done. What we've been talking about the last 3 days here is more of a factor. This is cool stuff that's coming together. You know, I think of John Fritz from UMBC who said, you know, any insight that you have, if it's not actionable, it's just interesting. And what we have been talking about the last 3 days here is how to pull together different vendors and institutions to make insights that are actionable. And that's a fundamental change, moving from the obvious things of connecting stuff, the duh factor, to the factor is exciting.
I've noticed the same thing, Rick, and that it's we're closer to the innovation as a community. I think we're not just catching up to what education needed, but we're working together to drive that innovation, and that's what's the really interesting piece.
Go ahead.
Maybe I can add just a few more things. So if we think about maybe more broadly than the technology, and we think about some of the trends or mega trends that we're seeing kind of across industry, I actually just published a white paper a few months ago on this, really talking about the future of work and the nature of jobs and how they're shifting and the implications for education as a result. If you want to check the white paper out, you can just go to d2l.com/futureofwork. But maybe to touch on a couple of those things that we see, you know, we're seeing in the corporate sector, basically all companies are having to become technology companies. And this is part of what's driving an explosion in the number of skills that are required to do the average job or in an average industry. And the shelf life of those skills is shortening. We're also seeing this big emergence of what's being called the gig economy, right? Where right now in North America, 33% of jobs fall under this kind of gig category of, you know, freelance and type jobs. And the expectation is that over the next 5 years, that goes to almost 50%. So that's really commoditizing skills and creating a bit of a skills market. We're also seeing AI moving automation out of the physical space and really into the cognitive space. And the result of that is it's going to start to shift the types of tasks and jobs that people have to do at an increasing pace, and again, constantly shifting the demand for the skills associated with those jobs. We're also seeing a huge demographic shift, right? The retirement of the baby boomers, and now the overtaking of the workplace by millennials who make up, I think, about 55% of the workforce now. And that's creating new and different pressures on employers, because the #1 decision factor for millennials in terms of what job they take or what job they stay at are the opportunities that they have for personal growth and professional development. And lastly, we're seeing this growing skills gap between the competencies that new graduates are coming out of schools with and the skills that are being demanded by employers. And that's, I mean, when you just do a look at some of the jobs that are being posted for now, you're seeing things like cryptocurrency finance officer or a drone squad manager, right? And that last one's from a finance company. I don't know why you need a drone squad manager, but they do. But I guess the point is that all these mega trends are really pointing to the fact that we're moving into an era where lifelong learning is actually becoming mandatory. And I think that will continue to drive challenges and also opportunities within the education system to support more things like work-integrated learning, and we're going to see a continual increasing proportion of non-traditional learners. So that means that personalization of education gets harder, but also becomes much more important. And I think that's really what's driving the need for both technology and education innovation. And that's why IMS is so important, because I think there's a big opportunity for IMS to help these organizations leverage the right combination of tools that they need to deliver solutions they need in this new era of learning.
It's interesting, the reference to efficacy earlier, and so many of you were clinging on to that. That's, from my perspective, just another term for learning impact. At its heart, in the teaching context, efficacy and learning impact are so strongly related. The question, how do you design as an organization, how do you design learning impact into your products? Tim?
Wow. You know, I think when we look at design, we kind of look at it from a variety of different phases. I think we look at #1, what are the customers asking us, period. You know, that's probably the #1 thing, because in K-12, there's no one better than the end customer that fundamentally knows where they want to end up and where they want to go. Secondly, we look at the technical standards, not just learning impact. We're looking at IEEE, we're looking at SMPTE, we're looking at web, we're looking at accessibility. We have to take all these pieces and put them in kind of a little basket when we design. And I think for us, since we're a learning object repository and when we also a content provider, we have to look at what the third parties are developing, which sounds a little different. Not everybody has to do that, but you know, what are they doing with their interface? How are they changing it? How does it impact into us? And that's where the standard piece comes in. So dynamic for us is, you know, if it's deep embedded links, whatever it is, how do I make that work? And then with that, then we decide we probably go back to one again and go back to the customer and say to Lee County, what do you want for analytics? What do you want as an outcome? You know, you've got these 22 vendors in here that are doing this. How do they facilitate a system? So, and I think there's a #4 here, which we probably don't even want to talk at a standards organization, but every one of us do in here, is we might have to build some kind of my horrible API word, right? Because we're not at 0, which is, you know, Rob's ultimate goal, but that so that I can work, you know, in a D2L or Canvas or whatever those integrations are, and that it can be fluid and functional to the end user. So it's different than it was 3 or 4 years ago, where you just thought about your product and your end user. Now you have to think about all these other providers, integrators, and outcomes. And to me, and not to give IMS, well, maybe to give IMS a plug, is I can't even imagine where we would be as vendors if we didn't have this, because we'd all be building the same thing. We really would. And we wouldn't do it very, very good. So, you know, I think where I see that technology model going and in the development in the next phases, it's standards here. For me, it's SMPTE standards, it's IEEE standards, it's back end, and that facilitating that leads us to where we develop the roadmap.
Holly, you're uniquely positioned as both a provider of technology and a consumer of technology at Florida Virtual. The question of efficacy and learning impact, how do you all design that into both your products and your processes?
Right, so as Mark said, we're set up a little bit uniquely. The legislature in Florida said, and this goes back to 1998, they said, we want to set you up as a school in the state, a statewide school, and we want you to serve students who just need 1 or 2 courses in order to meet whatever their educational goals are. But then we also want you to serve students in a full-time capacity too. Whatever the student needs, we want you to provide it to them in a virtual format. And then they said, and then here's some money. We want you to develop a whole bunch of courses so that you can teach these students, because back then there weren't any real virtual courses out there, and so we did. And then they said, and now we want you to license them to other distance learning providers and bring that money back in to improve your courseware to serve our students in Florida. So that's basically what we do. And since that time, IMS has just become just critical to us, because we have our content in 17 different learning management systems. And being able to set all that up, through using the IMS standards, we're able to do it much more quickly. We save over $100,000 a year by being able to, connect seamlessly, and so for us, that it's critical. So what we need is kind of going back to what Tim was saying. We need all the vendors to be marching in the same direction, so that we can serve all of the custom things that they need through a general set of standards.
Any other thoughts about learning impact, product design, efficacy?
Yeah, so part of our fundamental approach to product development is to ask ourselves what we are and what we aren't, and we iterate that constantly. But if we try to be everything to everyone, or we try to respond to every customer request, we actually won't serve anyone. That will end up being a very complex, confusing experience, and not mastering any particular component of that experience. So for us, it's asking that question and relating that to learning impact. So it's not just what do we choose to be as a platform, but we choose that because we believe that is where we can have the most impact. And then we look for partners in our world to also help us find where can we have the most impact in a place that we're not building, but that they are. And I think that's fundamental in understanding how to drive innovation quicker and drive impact quicker, because you don't get mired in this this feature war, or this long list of 450 buttons that you need to have, and instead you help partner with your customers to drive that innovation that they're seeking. So I think that's part of what we do. I also think that there's fundamental principles that you'll see evident in platforms and technologies serving our space, and knowing what those fundamental pieces are also helps drive. So rather than being truly flexible, although I would say Canvas is flexible, we strive to be much easier to use. So we have to also exchange not just what will we be, but how will we be that thing. And that's, once again, a constant iteration. We're looking to see what our community wants from us in that. But there's also holding true to that and delivering on that, and that's how I think we can have the most impact.
Yeah, it's stating the obvious at an IMS conference. But Tim said it well, no vendor is an island. We can't not have learning impact thinking we're the only solution. You've got to integrate. We did our first integration in 2006. It took over 9 months. I think we've done 260 some in the last 90 days, brought on new integrations. Average time is minutes, maybe an hour. Just the standards work. And you cannot impact learning without bringing all these vendors together in a solution.
Great. Yeah, Jeremy?
Yeah, it's funny because I think in the early days, you got asked in RFPs if you could do a single sign-on, right? And if you could, it was a differentiator.
Yeah.
And now that seems hilarious because an instructor can do it with 30 seconds in the platform, LTI link, right? So things have shifted a lot. there. In terms of learning impact at D2L, you know, we tend to focus on what we call our mission metrics. So we have a set of mission metrics, and these are really about, you know, our mission of how to, you know, helping to transform the way the world learns. Well, we said, how do we want to measure those things? How do we want to, over time, identify that we're making progress against that mission? So those are things like adoption and student outcomes and retention, completion, engagement, productivity, and learner satisfaction. And so most of our customers tend to be focused on one or more of those areas. And so we, in terms of what we try and deliver, we look at, will it help move the needle on any of those things? And the way that we see moving the needle on most of those things is driven by increasing the ability to personalize learning experiences for students. So whether that's personalizing how materials delivered or enabling more flexible learning models, online, blended, competency-based. Maybe it's improving support for a wider variety of learning and accessibility needs. There's a long list of things where we can focus and add personalization. But I think no matter what it is, technology can support these areas, but it requires, I think where the flexibility comes in is the flexibility in the stack of the technologies that you're using. And I think that's where standards have the biggest impact, is that more seamless integration through this stack of technologies, and then also the interchange of the data that they all generate allows us to better support driving the impact that our customers are trying to achieve.
So there's a strong relationship between this concept of flexibility and the expression of focus that Melissa was sharing with us. And when we stop and think about the range of specs that we have, standards that we have at IMS, 6, 7 really prominent standards, cover a great variety of use cases in the institution and elsewhere. But what specific needs are you aware of that we may not be addressing yet? Jeremy, you had a list of things that you all are preparing for that we may not actually have a standard to address. Tim, do you have any thoughts about specific needs that we're not addressing?
Well, I think taking it back a little bit, I think we're improving everything we already have. And I think, you know, whether that's LTI Advantage or whatever, I think the idea that we're improving them with the input from the end customers and the direction is a key. So let's say that there's a platform now, and maybe 5 years ago, I don't know how everybody else feels, there wasn't really a platform. Now we have enough to cover some of the bases. So, you know, when we talk about analytics with Caliber and other pieces, I'm sure there's, even though they're started, to me they're very immature. They're gonna expand, they're gonna grow, they're gonna change, and so, you know, things like analytical data, artificial intelligence. Are we going to do 3D modeling of data models? Are we going to do 3D processing of data resources? How those fit into our standards and our direction, I don't know if I have, Mark, the answer to that. But I see that those things are coming, and I starting to see demand for those things, and I see that in the network and things we're working with, some of those require their complete network for access and speed. So the standards of how all that is going to fall over in the next 4 or 5 years are going to continue to me to be a challenge. Is there one that comes up to me? It's going to be, for me, it's going to be the relationship of a student and we've answered a lot of this already, but the relationship to a student, a teacher, a classroom, a parent, the analytical data output, how that will be processed, the intelligence of that data, the humanization of that data, right? You know, I love Amazon, but I bought one pipe fitting, I don't need any more, right? So that analytics doesn't work for what we want. And we see in districts in different states, they want different levels of what they want their children to see and not see from an analytical and what they want a response to be. So the human factor of the analytical piece, to me, that's, to me, there's going to be a standard here. Okay, that's what I'm getting to, because that's your question. Is there's not just going to be the standard that's going to be a caliber, but it's going to be define some fields in there that are the social impact of what people want as standard. Now, we could talk that question for years, right? But that I see that as a request and starting to happen with us. And nothing we do follows that, and I'm not sure that IMS should, but I think we're going to get pushed into some of that as we grow into this model.
Similar to what Tim's describing, I think we have some more foundational work to do, and that's the way our standards are interconnecting. Now that we have a solid platform with LTI Advantage, I think there's opportunities to bring in Caliper and talk about how those two relate to each other and start to drive to that analytics need that you're talking about. I think the same could be true for CASE and Caliper, truly marrying our standards together and understanding in what spaces they need to be the king of the domain and in what spaces do they need to collaborate with another in order to truly accomplish what we're trying to do with them. I would also add, and this is just a perhaps wild idea, I think we have verticals of technologies, and we should start to look at perhaps expanding standards or creating extensions around specific verticals so that the user experience is much more effective in a platform. So the way a standard integrates perhaps content to a platform is different than perhaps a plagiarism tool to a platform or a video tool to a platform. There's some different user workflows that are embedded in those experiences together, and it could be interesting for us to start to explore, hey, where are we all using our APIs to do those crazy connections in these more popular verticals that are being utilized, and how do we develop extensions to our existing standards to address those verticals?
And one of the things that I would love for us to look at is, as we look at those verticals, start thinking about, okay, so what are the verticals going to be 5 years out from now? For example, is there going to be a play between social networking and education, and how are those platforms going to connect, and what is that going to look like? Because we know students are out, on Twitter and Facebook and all of those social networking sites now, but we're not really leveraging them for education too much yet. And so what does that look like down the road? And then another one that's close to my heart that we've been working on trying to get a pilot approved for the last few years is, how does web proctoring come into play for those students that have special needs that cannot take a statewide mandated exam in a classroom setting? So how do we provide those students with the same opportunities, and then how do we connect those systems together so that all students can be monitored, assessed with data and analytics and all of that down the road as well. So I'm always looking for, we've made so much progress in the last few years. We've got, some established verticals, but then what are the next 2 or 3 verticals down the road that we need to be looking at?
I would add that as your board, one of the things that we've heard clearly is an effort to try to balance what you're hearing up here, which is we've got these great platforms now with LTI Advantage, with Caliper, with One Roster, with One EdTech. How do we maintain platforms and get them implemented and not have disruptive changes in those, but yet at the edges get workflows and best practices and extensions that can solve some of these other problems? And that's a balance. And we need to hear your voice on that as well to make sure that we're balancing that right.
This afternoon at 2:50, we'll also have 3 board members available too, Rick and Melissa, Martin Roorda also, to answer questions. We'll have a full 30 minutes available for you to pose questions to the board. So we welcome your participation there. Any other specific needs or gaps that come to mind? All right, Melissa, is IMS and its community going in the right direction? And if not, if we are, how do we accelerate the progress? If we're not, what changes do we need to make?
The second softball? Okay. So I do want to start by acknowledging, I think the energy and the direction that I've seen at this conference compared to last LILI's and even to some of our quarterly meetings has been really impactful. I'm watching work happen at all levels, which is awesome, right? We're discussing strategy and planning how do we solve large problems while we have folks in a room spending a day hacking at LTI Advantage and making it work, right? That is a really powerful combination. I'm seeing, rather than just conversations, actions coming out of the experience here. So I love that, and I think that's a great direction. I had the privilege of doing research on what communities are, and specifically communities of practice in my graduate work. And I think about the fundamentals of, are we an effective community or even community of practice? And those fundamentals are, do we have a domain, right? And we all do. Education and education technology. Do we have a community, a group of people all passionately interested in that? We do as well. And then the final one is, do we have a practice? Do we have ways that we are together developing a knowledge set, building innovation, moving our common domain? We do, but this is where I think we have opportunities for improvement. I think some of the latest work, particularly in IMS, around how we manage work groups, what are the products coming out of work groups, how are we more consistently managing standards across the board and versions of standards, how are we now with LTI Advantage setting the norm to have a platform on which extensions build, but that platform stays solid and consistent. I think those things are good actions. We need to do more of that. Rather than just coming together and having conversations and throwing ideas out, we need to take those ideas and turn those into that practice and that regulated practice so that we can all spend more time utilizing the products of that practice than actually evolving the practice itself.
Any other thoughts on this subject? That's great. Thank you very much. This question has to do with the market. Has to do with alignments of incentives. Do you think that consumer and supplier incentives are aligned when it comes to standards? And I'm specifically thinking about the benefit of choice for the end consumer. Well, Jeremy, would you have some thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, so I think in our lives, consumers expect interoperability. When you plug in a power cord or try and plug a monitor or a headphone into your computer or your phone, it generally just works, right? Unless you buy an Apple product and try to use it with anything else. But consumers have come to, I think, just broadly in their life, expect interoperability. A couple years ago, we brought in, over time, we brought in 150 K-12 teachers, and we interviewed them for 4 hours, and we basically wanted them to walk us through their whole day. Show us all their workflows, show us the tools they used, the technology and things like that. And one of the teachers that we talked to, she talked about how she wanted, in one of her lessons, she wanted to use a collaborative digital bulletin board where students could all pin things and write things on a bulletin board. And so one night she spent about 3 or 4 hours kind of searching the web for a tool. She found one that she liked. The next day she brought it into her classroom. And then she had to go through the process of setting up accounts in this system for all of her students. So she spent an entire period getting each student logged in, creating an account, and then had to send an email confirmation. They had to go to their email and confirm it. So that took the whole period. And then the next period, when they came back to that class again, then they got to use the tool. But they literally wasted a full lesson getting users authenticated into a simple app. And I think that situation for software is kind of analogous to like buying a mouse, taking it home, opening it up, and the end you're supposed to plug in your computer. It's just a bunch of wires. And I don't, so it's generally not an experience that people have with hardware today, but for some reason, we're okay with it. We permit it to happen with software. And without a standards-based approach, I think that idea of choice, what you can plug in is much more limited. Unless you're really good at soldering, your choice is much more limited. So I think to answer the question around choice, to me, choice is the benefit of interoperability.
Holly, new learning or new learning models, new student success models. Are there emerging models that we need to be supporting or support better?
So you know, there's always going to be new models, whatever, you know, the latest and greatest is. But I do think we need to spend a little bit of time looking at e-portfolios and, you know, student-created work, and we're seeing more and more of that. Students being able to, you know, take the best of what they're creating. And students are mobile. They move from school to school. They move from provider to provider. So being able to import and export, you know, all of that student data that isn't just an assessment of some sort, being able to support them and help them show, you know, who they are and what they've accomplished, and help them be the best that they can be. I think that that is a charge that all of us in here have. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where e-portfolios go. And then, you know, there's assessments are getting more and more complex and personalized, and just being able to support that. For an example, we scramble groups of questions within groups of questions. Not all providers support that type of integration, so there's not an easy way to import those assessment questions into every, say, LMS that's out there. So it still requires quite a bit of custom work. So when we can, you know, get to that point where we can integrate at deeper and deeper levels, I think that that's going to help too, at least from an efficiency standpoint.
Other thoughts about new learning models?
Well, I don't know if it's not really new, but I think it's going to change a little bit. Accessibility issues, and with, you know, how it's used now is kind of like an ancillary piece that somebody needs some pieces of accessibility, but I think that's going to dynamically shift. I think we're going to find that most of us need some kind of accessibility in our learning. So it will be interesting where that goes, where the software providers take that, where they integrate to that, you know, and at least for us, I think the other part that we see the visioning is, now let's make the classroom work in K-12. Fundamentally, does it really work? You know, with 22 students looking at a PC and a teacher up front, and you don't really know what's going on very well. You kind of do, but you don't. So I think, you know, for us, that unified classroom kind of attitude or direction, we think is going to play a role into what each of us do and what each of us want to take. And the data and the accessibility items for those students, I think, are going to become more part of an integrated piece in the near future.
In higher ed, we're starting to hear about co-curricular achievements, being able to demonstrate employability skills, leadership, flexibility, teamwork, things that are non-cognitive, quote unquote, and not normally evaluated and assessed in the context of teaching and learning. It'd be very rare. Are you all, and the platform companies especially, being approached with, for solutions that are going to help institutions to begin this convergence, which is at this point starting with the e-transcripts, bringing together employability skills with academic achievement. But of course, it's going to back up into the curriculum, into assessment, into process management. It's more tied into the student success model. Are you hearing anything about that, or are your customers asking you about the convergence of these career and employability skills and giving them the first-class citizenship that employers are asking for?
I can talk about that. So a little bit in the corporate space especially, it's exploding. So with the kind of this shortening of shelf life of hard skills, you know, hard skills are what will get you a job, but like the softer, the transverse skills, horizontal type skills, those are the ones that kind of carry you through a career. And where there's gaps there, you have trouble, you know, with this shelf life problem of putting someone in a new role, right? So you can train them on the hard skills. It's fairly simple to do that. The soft skills, a little more challenged. So we're seeing this huge explosion in terms of the corporate market being really interested in professional development tool sets that can help build these soft skills, right? So we're seeing things like a strong interest in video and peer assessment tools or social assessment tools, right? So think of a salesperson, they're learning a new pitch and they want to see, they want feedback on that. That's not necessarily like a teacher-student thing always. It's the better way to do that is put it out to all their peers to say, okay, as you watch the video of this person deliver a sales pitch, give point-in-time feedback to them on how they're delivering it, how they could improve it, things that were good, things like that. So we're seeing a strong interest across kind of a whole bunch of different role types in the corporate space, very specifically around developing these social skills.
We're definitely seeing it as well. Back to Holly's comments about e-portfolios. So having been in the space for close to 20 years now, e-portfolios comes up and then it goes away, and then it comes up and then it goes away. And lately it seems to have much more of a stronger drive because of this idea of showing not just the typical skills or work products that you're getting in a traditional class, but how are you, these soft skills, how are you demonstrating these? How are you demonstrating the connection of ideas in particular? And so we're getting lots of questions around not only how can we move content in and out of portfolios, how can we connect to portfolios, but what is a portfolio? And at what point do platform companies also provide that capability without being a portfolio, perhaps? We're also seeing it transpire in how folks ask us to break down a course. So if you think about this, I mean, most LMSs still have a course construct that you can repurpose for anything. But folks are asking us, how do we repurpose that from a time perspective? How do we do just-in-time learning? How do we went back to my comment about unbundling, how do we create that to be just a learning experience? And I think all of that is because we're breaking apart what the skills are and trying to represent not only the traditional academic skills, but also these soft skills. And that's coming to us in, redo the course, redo the structure of your platform in order to address these needs.
Yeah, I would agree with my panelists in the question. It's tremendously on the forefront of people's minds. The integration of and the alignment of higher ed and corporate training is becoming blurred. If you follow VitalSource, you know that we acquired a company last year in that field, so we're very focused on that. But really, the questions that come to us in there are no black holes. Don't segment your data, get the data out of there so that we can do these things with it, so that we can document what was done, so that we know what learning happened and get out of that black hole.
And even at a K-12 level, those soft skills are being mandated at the state level to be integrated in courses, offer leadership style courses where kids can demonstrate leadership, time management, integrity, all of those types of soft skills. What we're seeing is that needs to be integrated from a very early age, that kind of character building all the way up.
We've covered a lot of territory. I wanted to kind of narrow the topic a little bit and just talk about this week and ask if anyone has any observations that they just wanted to share that maybe they haven't shared about the program this week.
I perhaps have an observation, not necessarily related to the program, but a conversation in one of the panels I was on earlier this week. The discussion of flexibility versus complexity came up, and I think the more our standards enable us to do, that's going to become more and more of a challenge for us, especially embedded in what that student learning experience becomes in a world of ultimate options. So I think that's been an interesting conversation to see come to the table. I also think we talk a lot about an NGDLE or building ecosystems, and someone in that same session raised, but how do I pay for that? How do I support that? How do I take an environment of 55 technologies and make that doable? This was from a colleague in a K-12 district, and that's also very real. So I think we need to start digging into that discussion around how can we give that flexibility without the complexity and make that a doable thing from a budget and support perspective.
Any other observations?
I think it's been a fantastic week. I think there's been obviously people with different opinions, different suggestions, which I think is fantastic. I also think that we have so much. We're like on a scale of 1 to 10, we're a 0.5. Rob probably doesn't want to hear 0.5, but I'm going to say 0.5 because there's so much more that, especially in K-12, of getting the K-12 community and leadership across states and across districts, understanding what this really means for them. And that's, very limited right now. Even though it's growing at a rate, I would consider that rate relatively slow. And I think we're still working in that, and it's improving every year. So I guess the observation is there's a lot of very, very intelligent people in this room. And thanks to them, we're making great progress with standards, thanks to their input on what they need to do, how you build the code. And I don't go to another meeting like that, where you've got people that are developing, people that are using it, you've got management, and they're facilitating, and working together. So the conference is fantastic. I'm hoping 3 years from now it's 3 times the size, Sandra. So, and I think it needs to be, because in K-12 especially, success is going to be with IMS building these things, building these standards. So, yes, I think the conference gets better every year. I think we get more knowledgeable people on the standards, more engagement in what we need to do, and that's fantastic. But, I know we have a long way to go. So, that's my gut feeling anyway.
I wanted to take a moment, Tim, to call out Sandra and her team and Lisa and their teams for putting together this conference, there was tremendous amount of work that went into it, and it just has gone off flawlessly, I think. A credit to both of you, so thank you for that. Except for you're supposed to announce your panelists before you start. That wasn't totally flawless. This next question is totally opt-in.
GDPR
And
tomorrow.
it wasn't in the Google Doc. As a board member, what frustrated you this year and why? And what thrilled you?
Oh, I got that. I'm going to opt in. We're GDPR ready. So when I think about that, what thrilled me was even more global participation. Global's in our name, but we're often very North American centric. And so we need to continue to push that and continue to make that just an assumption. It shouldn't be something special. It should be an assumption. A frustration I have is that although it was tremendously successful, we made accessibility a special track this year. It should be an assumption. It shouldn't be a special track. And we will be successful if a year, 2, 3 years from now, it's assumed. It's just expected, and it's there. That's not to say anything negative about the track, which was wonderful, but we all need to take that to heart and make that a part of our products.
Any other brave souls? Frustration? Thrill?
I'll take a stab. So this is being new to the board. This has been just a tremendous experience for me, and being able to attend the sessions, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, we're there. We're almost there. This is going to go to scale, and it's just going to revolutionize the world, right? So I was just totally pumped the whole week. But then I kept thinking, since I'm a policy wonk, I kept thinking, awareness. We've got to get policy people aware of what we're doing so that they can see the vision of where is the potential, where are we going, so that they can support us at their level and recognize all the good work that's happening down here. So that's my observation.
This is the final question, and this is required. It was in the Google Doc, everyone, starting here with Jeremy Auger, D2L. You all know Jeremy? In one sentence, where do you want the IMS community to be a year from now?
So I would love it if next year there weren't any more conversations about why standards are important, and that became kind of like having the conversation about why you would ever need more than 640K of RAM.
Rick?
Going back to my earlier comment, I want even more moments where we all say, ah, and we're delighted by what we're doing.
Holly?
I'm going to kind of tag on to what I said before, more awareness, more training for everyone, more awareness at the decision maker level, and trying to get more participation at that level at the conference.
Melissa?
I'm going to steal from Holly and Tim. Twice as many people and twice the diversity. So more people at different levels, holding different roles, even tangential folks to our community, so that we do get that awareness out.
Wow, there's nothing left. But you know, for me, I think not enough time and more interaction with all of you out there on what we should be doing. More engagement, and we get a lot of engagement, but I think we need a lot more, because you all have great ideas. And from the board, I could speak. Surely the board would all agree with this, that we want more engagement, more data from you of what you think we need to do, good and bad, by the way. We really love bad data. Bad data that comes to us and say, we really don't like what you're doing, because we believe that there's going to be conflict in success, and that we're not always going to do things correctly, and we need you to point that out. So don't be afraid to bring up, don't be afraid to talk. So that's longer than a sentence, but I think it's important, and if there's anything I want to see, that's what I'd love to see more of.
Great. Please thank our board members.